So I was editing a video when I happened to glance over at NeoGAF, and I saw that Marc Laidlaw had posted the script for Episode 3, Half-Life 2 Episode 3. And so I couldn't help myself. I had to read it. And finally, this feels like the last nail in the coffin. And I know there have been a lot of nails in that coffin, but this does feel like the last one. It feels for sure that Half-Life 3 will never ever be made. And there have been signs for years. Almost all the writers at Valve have left. Marc Laidlaw himself left years ago, and he was the main writer for Half-Life, Half-Life 2. The whole Half-Life series is sort of his child. And so I want to talk a bit about that because it just doesn't seem fair. It doesn't seem fair that since Half-Life Episode 2 released, there have been like 10 Assassin's Creeds. Every single one of them has come out. And if you're an Assassin's Creed fan, that's great. Awesome for you. But if you're a Half-Life fan, and I know there are millions out there in the world, this sucks. And there's really no other way to put it. I love the Half-Life series. Half-Life 2 is probably my favorite game of all time. And Half-Life was actually one of the first video games I ever played. So this franchise meant a lot to me. And I was one of those people that I held out hope for a long time. I would say at least given up hope about 3 years ago. And there was always an inkling of hope, I would say. But this is definitely it. You can sense Marc Laidlaw's frustration, his just general unhappiness with how everything happened from this thing that he posted, and it really makes you reflect. It makes you reflect upon a lot of things. Valve used to be, for me, this company that was doing great things. It was pushing boundaries. It was creating not only great games, but innovative games, hiring developers right out of college, going to fairs and seeing other people's games, taking mods and saying, oh yeah, we'll put our full force behind them. They were beholden to no one because they're not publicly traded. There's no shareholders, so they can do whatever they want. And it turns out what they want to do is not make video games. And that's unfortunate. And that's why sometimes shareholders are good, I guess, but not always. But they used to be this company that stood for a lot of things. They were one of the good companies. When other companies like EA were doing scummy things, they were doing the right things. Well, now they're just in it for the money. At least that's what it seems. So many creatives have left. So much of the stuff they're producing now seems by the book. Artifact was just announced, and that's a card game because card games are really big right now and really profitable. And it just seems like they no longer care. They no longer care about the stories, about the storytelling, all that stuff in the Half-Life commentary tracks that you can listen to, all the stuff in the Portal commentary tracks where they talk about how cared for everything is, how much attention to detail they put in their games. They no longer care about any of that. And I'm sure they do put that in Dota and they do put that in CSGO, but not to the point where they are breaking ground. They are doing amazing things. They are essentially accelerating the genre forward. There's none of that. And while we're talking about Half-Life, I firmly believe that Left 4 Dead and Portal are also dead. We might see a Portal spin-off game sometime in the future, maybe VR experience, whatever, but we will never see a Portal 2, a game like Portal 2 again. And it's really depressing. It's really depressing for a lot of reasons. Just think about all the creative people at Valve that came into work and have a 10-year void, I guess, about a 7-year void because of Portal 2, but a 7-year void of not doing much. 7 years you go into work, and at the end of those 7 years, there's nothing to show for it. All those wonderful people, uh, like Marc Laidlaw, who weren't able to finish what they started. Um, and I don't want to put words in anyone's mouths. I don't want to put words in Marc Laidlaw's mouth, but I can't help but feel his frustration and his annoyance. And maybe he came into work and did nothing. And that's not a knock on him. That's a knock on the atmosphere of Valve. We read so much about it, how you can push your desk to the other side of the aisle and work with someone else that day, and you can do work on whatever you want. And apparently that just didn't work for Half-Life. Um, and it's not only just Marc Laidlaw, it's Eric Wolpaw and Chet Felizak, which I think I know Eric Wolpaw left. I don't know if Chet left, but Eric Wolpaw had an amazing story when he came to work for Valve. He was sick at the time, and so but Valve said, "Hey, come work for us when you get better." And he was like, "Well, I know where I'm working for the next rest of my life," and then he quit. Many years later, but he quit. And I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I have to imagine he came in each day and just couldn't work on anything. I know what it's like to be a super creative person and not be able to creatively express myself. It is frustrating to no end, and I'm sure the paycheck was really good at Valve, which is probably why they stayed as long as they did. And I don't fault them for any of that, but I have to imagine eventually it just became too much. I feel for Marc Laidlaw, who probably could have been a much bigger thing in the sci-fi world had he have been allowed to complete his franchise. Um, and I think of Adam Foster, who was the developer of the mod for Half-Life 2, Minerva, I think it's called. And he eventually got a job at Valve, and I don't think he ever got to work on a Half-Life game. I know he worked on one of the Portals. I think he worked on Portal 2, but I don't think he ever got a chance to work on a Half-Life. And again, I don't want to speak for him, but I have to imagine he was frustrated, and I imagine many people at Valve were. I don't understand it. And like I said, it's like, why couldn't have Half-Life been Assassin's Creed? Why couldn't have we gotten those every year? Maybe that's too much, but it's coming up this October, I think, the 10-year anniversary of Episode 2. 10 years. It was 6 years from Half-Life to Half-Life 2, and that was a lot. But it's been 10 years and nothing. Valve continues to remain tight-lipped. They continue to be sometimes coy about it. They will not tell anyone, none of their millions of fans, what went on with that game, what happened, why it had development problems, why it's not been announced or even released or whatever. They remain tight-lipped, and that's frustrating as a fan too, because at some point I didn't even want Half-Life 3. I just wanted an answer, and to have millions of fans that care so deeply and just to turn your nose at them and say, no, we're not going to say anything is just incredible to me. And so that's why I want to say thank you, Marc Laidlaw, for doing this, for providing closure, for at least saying something. And I have no doubt that more stuff about Half-Life will come out in the future as more people decide to leak it or more people get frustrated like Marc Laidlaw. But thank you, Marc Laidlaw, for taking the first steps. I love your writing. I think Half-Life is very well done, and it's one of those stories that I wish I could have seen the end to. But alas, I don't think that will ever happen. Thank you, Valve, Gabe Newell, and other past and present developers for Half-Life, for Half-Life 2, for Left 4 Dead, Portal, for other games that you've developed as well, Team Fortress 2. Thank you for that. I still think those are some of the best games ever, and I appreciate them, and I don't want to stop appreciating them just because I'm upset. But to Gabe Newell, who was kind enough soul to answer my email when I was like really much younger, and thank you, but also it boggles my mind how little you care. And that's a really mean thing to say, and I don't want it to be super mean, but I do want to be honest, and I guess I have this mental gap where I don't understand how you could not say anything. You aren't beholden to a stockholder. There's no NDA on you. You can say whatever you want. Tomorrow, you could go on your servers and release everything Half-Life that has ever been made, concept art, unreleased models, everything. And instead, you do the exact opposite. You remain tight-lipped. Worst of all, you remain coy and sometimes trolly about things. And it was fun while we thought the game was still coming, but now it's just a dick move. And I don't know how else to describe it besides that. When you go on Reddit and you have an AMA and you say, we're interested in further games in the Half-Life universe, I'm sorry, but until proven otherwise, you're lying out your butt. And I just don't understand. You have millions of people who own Half-Life. It's not like these games were niche games. They sold incredibly well. Half-Life 2 is easily in the top 10 best-selling games of all time. Or it's not top 10, probably top 100, but still really good. Um, like I said, Half-Life 2 won Game of the Decade at some Game Awards thing. It was that important. It beat out more modern console games. It's just that timeless. And so I don't understand how you could sit there, run your company, be worth however many billions of dollars you're worth, and say, no, I am not going to say anything about this game that people care about because why should I? And I don't know why you should. I guess empathy. I guess if you, I mean, like in your AMA, you clearly say you care about Half-Life, so I don't understand how you could not. And that, above everything else, is annoying. Uh, at this point, uh, I don't need Half-Life to be released. I would like you to explain what happened. And not because I'm entitled to it. I don't feel any entitlement to this. You could do nothing, and I don't care if you don't do anything. Because what I care about is Half-Life. I don't care about your little game that you like to play. Um, and so I'd appreciate it if you did say something, but ultimately that's on you. And I know you're not even listening to this, so there's really no point. But I like to believe that if I've conveyed anything to you today, my audience, that there are people who care about Half-Life, and it isn't easy to see this final nail in the coffin. It isn't easy to see our hopes and dreams crushed for finally, if they hadn't been crushed before. But this is officially it. This story will never happen. The story that Marc Laidlaw has outlined here will never make its way in game form. The only way I see of a future Half-Life game is if the IP is handed off to some other developer, which may happen. In all fairness, anything can happen, and I think that might be a likely course of action some many years in the future. But I don't think it's a likely course of action for Valve to develop it in-house. I just don't think that the atmosphere has proved conducive to that. I don't think that I'm not even sure anyone there wants to or can, really. And that's all I have to say. I'm sad, but moving on. Thank goodness Valve are not the best game developers anymore. They are probably not even in the top 10 anymore. They've fallen because, well, A, they don't produce games anymore, but B, they're lacking creativity. You look at Blizzard, who does a lot of the same models, a lot of the, easy money producing things, but Overwatch is brilliantly creative. And that released a couple years ago or last year. Team Fortress 2 is creative for the time, but there's just none of that left at Valve. You look at the Team Titanfall 2, which is basically Half-Life in the future. A lot of big credit to that game. That game is amazing. Other developers are picking up the slack, and Valve used to be a beacon of great game design and just good Q&A and everything, but now they've fallen so far, And it's so sad to see some company just overcome with greed that they don't care about continuing their stories, but not only that, just finishing them. If you've liked my rant today, I'm Michael Kozichenko. You can follow me on Twitter at Mishakos, and you can support me on Patreon at patreon.com/Mishakos. I'm sorry this has been fairly ranty. This is technically an editorial, and for future editorials, I would definitely like more structure, but it is very late at night. I haven't shaved, and I just wanted to get this out because I knew I couldn't work on my current video. I was too distracted to, but I knew I had to do something, and so I did this, and I hope you like it, and I hope maybe you've found it interesting. I don't know. I'm doing this more for myself than for anyone. It just feels good to talk about it. And yeah, I'll end on this. It's weird to care so much about a video game. It's weird to care so much about a mute protagonist. It's weird to care so much about a world. It's weird to want a resolution. But I do. I want that. I've wanted that. And it's not just so I can play it, it's so I can have that. It's so I can finish that. So I can check that off the list, because you can't. Anyway, have a wonderful day.